What makes a video game, and what separates it from other narrative mediums? Most people would say on the simplest level that a game is interactive, while something like a movie is not. And while I would agree, I believe it's a little bit more complex than that. In fact, I would argue that in order to be truly considered a video game, one must include at least one of three different elements from its interactivity, which I'll go over in this video. And regarding games with a narrative focus, by which I mean any game that attempts to tell the player a complete story that goes beyond just an excuse for the gameplay, are at their best when they effectively utilize all three. But before we talk about those, we first need to answer the question of what a game is in the first place. There are of course going to be a lot of differing opinions on the exact definition, but the best one that I could find is from Bernard Suits, who defines a game as an activity directed towards bringing about a specific state of affairs using only means permitted by rules, where the rules prohibit more efficient in favor of less efficient means, and where such rules are accepted just because they make possible such activity.
That's supposed to mean something to me, man.
Basically, this just means that a game is an activity governed by rules that limit what we can do in said activity in order to facilitate it properly. Now to explain what I mean, suppose you want to make a game like Super Mario Bros., where the goal is to make it to the end of the level and slide down that flagpole. Now imagine that the level in question is just a simple straight path from point A to point B, with no obstacles to get in your way. I mean, this is technically more efficient, as it allows you to finish the level faster and easier, but nothing is being gained from the interactivity. You're just moving from left to right. In a certain sense, you could say that adding some obstacles would make the activity less efficient, as it would now be harder to complete, but that's kind of the point, and it's what Suits was getting at with his definition. In other words, you can look at gaming as the kind of thing that brings value in its journey and not its destination, so to speak. Which brings us to the most common element of a game's interactive nature, challenge. This one is kind of broad, but simply put, this is the kind of interactivity that engages the player by taking advantage of people's natural desire to problem solve. Going back to our Mario example, by adding enemies, platforming, and power-ups, there's now something engaging about the game's interactive systems, which now require timing, precision, and skill to complete. Keep in mind though, that a game's mechanics don't need to be difficult to master in order to be engaging in this way. It's more about presenting a puzzle to the player that needs to be solved. For example, look at a game like Power Wash Simulator. It's literally just a game with the entire premise centered around cleaning the dirt off of a given area. So why is a game like that able to engage the player so successfully? Well, that would be because, in a way, the task presented to the player is a kind of problem that needs solving, which, like I mentioned before, is something that is generally really hard for people to ignore. Most games utilize gameplay mechanics that are a little more complex than this, but ultimately, even the most complex of games relies on this problem-solving attitude to engage its players. This kind of challenge, whether it be difficult or not, is an especially engaging part of interactive mediums that can't really be used anywhere else. Now, like I said before, most games utilize this element of interactivity, and I would imagine that most games you can think of off the top of your head have it to some degree. However, some games don't rely on complex or challenging mechanics at all. Instead, they focus on a different element of the medium's interactivity, the player's ability to affect the narrative. Think of a game like the Stanley Parable. In terms of gameplay, there really isn't any. I mean, the game and several others like it have been dubbed walking simulators because the gameplay consists of, well, walking, and pressing a button here and there, I guess? And while that may sound boring, that's not where the game tries to be engaging. Instead, the game is entirely focused on the narrative and how the player's choices can affect the direction it can go in. In this way, the interactive nature of the medium is still utilized in an effective way and is able to provide a unique experience that would be impossible in a non-interactive format, such as a movie. But while a game like the Stanley Parable is a great example of a game that exclusively uses player impact on the narrative as its form of interactivity, a more subtle example of this kind of player impact is found in Red Dead Redemption 2. If you don't know, this game uses a karma or honor system which tracks both the good and bad choices you make throughout the game, and range from the more major, story-driven choices to the more minor things you can do in the open world, like helping strangers, committing crimes, or just being an all-around menace. Using the system allows the player to shape Arthur based on the actions they take throughout the game, which ultimately changes his behavior and the direction of the narrative.
Hey,
Up here, it's him.
it's too late.
Form up, we shoot on sight.
I clear off, sir.
Well, seeing as I'm here, may as well protect the payment.
Up here, it's him.
It's too late.
Form up, we shoot on sight.
I clear off, sir.
Well, seeing as I'm here, I'll do what I can for you.
I always appreciated this feature because it means the character you see during cutscenes will better reflect the version of him you play as opposed to most open world games of this nature where you can act like a total psychopath in game, but then in the cutscenes the protagonist seems way more reasonable. And yes, that means being a murder hobo actually has an effect on the story. Anyway, this isn't the only game to do this, but I think RDR2 implements it particularly well. One more series worth mentioning regarding this aspect of player choice are the Telltale games. These games are entirely built around the idea of player choice and how their actions affect the narrative. Though it's worth mentioning that these games are often criticized for these choices being fairly shallow or only offering an illusion of choice. For example, in the Walking Dead games, every time you're given the choice of saving one of two people, you'll quickly recognize the pattern of whichever character you saved, inevitably dying just a little later on in the story as to not complicate the amount of branches in the narrative. Your actions may slightly alter dialogue or the appearance of characters, but you'll ultimately end up with an almost identical story each playthrough, except for maybe a different ending. And while that may be true, at least partially, I think there is an aspect of the narrative choices found in these games that is often overlooked, which brings us to our third and final element of interactivity: immersion. This can be achieved in a number of ways, but it essentially encompasses any choice a player can make in a game that makes them feel more enveloped in its world. Thinking about it in these terms, when a player is presented with a choice between saving one character over another, who to kick off their team, or any other tough decision, the game is now engaging with them on an emotional level, using the interactive nature of the medium to make the player feel personally invested in the story by forcing them to make difficult decisions. It's because of this that any illusion of choice that may be present in the Telltale games never personally bothered me, as I feel this element of immersion more than justifies these games' existence as games rather than movies or shows. Another game that does this masterfully is Soma, which, without going into spoilers, is chock full of choices that really have no effect on the direction the story goes in, but nonetheless present morally complex dilemmas that challenge you on a philosophical level, and is the kind of game that leaves you thinking about it for a while after you've already finished it. Basically, what I'm getting at with these examples is that there is more than one way for a game to make the player's choices matter. Of course, these choices could affect the story, but they can also be used to affect the player directly, and I think there's value in that shouldn't be understated. Beyond making tough choices though, a video game can immerse the player by simply having them live in the world, by having the player personally explore the environment, talk with NPCs, and manually push the story forward. A game can connect its players to the narrative in a way that no other medium can. If you've ever played a scary game with a friend, it was probably way easier to just watch your friend play, and then became a lot scarier when it was your turn to pick up the controller. The fear you feel becomes a lot stronger when playing, because in a way, you're now in the experience instead of just observing it. This ability to almost transfer the feelings of the protagonist to the player is possibly the most impactful thing a video game can accomplish as a narrative medium. Now, while those are the major examples of what you can do with immersion, even smaller things like an NPC asking the player, I don't know, what their favorite flavor of ice cream is, helps to immerse the player by allowing them to flesh out their character just that much more. Flavor text like this, no pun intended, is a small but not inconsequential way of giving the player the ability to feel more connected to the character they're playing as. Now, as I said at the beginning of this video, I think the best narrative-focused games utilize all three of these elements of interactivity, though I'm not saying that games which don't have all three elements can't be great. I wouldn't even necessarily say that all games should have all three, as some genres just wouldn't be able to facilitate all of them, but the games that do are really something special, as they take advantage of the core aspect of the medium to the fullest. Games like Witcher 3, Baldur's Gate 3, and Red Dead Redemption 2 are great examples of this, each possessing fun and challenging mechanics, branching story paths, and immersive moral and emotional dilemmas that aim to get players fully invested in the story the game is trying to tell. So, after going into all of that, what truly makes a video game a video game? I think the answer to that question is interactivity with a purpose. In other words, A video game needs to properly engage its players with the one thing that separates it from any other medium: choice. To put it simply, any game worth its salt should be able to answer the question, what does this experience gain from being interactive? And to fully emphasize this point, I would like to talk about one more video game that I think fails to answer this question in any meaningful way: Mixtape. I know this game has been covered by many other channels already, as it's received quite a lot of buzz during its release a couple months ago.
Stop! He's already dead.
But at the risk of being redundant, I wanted to talk about this game because it was honestly one of the reasons I wanted to make this video in the first place. Similarly to the Stanley Parable, Mixtape is a walking simulator type game that puts a strong emphasis on its narrative. However, where Stanley Parable utilizes the power of choice to make its interactions interesting, Mixtape doesn't. Nor does it do anything else for that matter. It's a real-life example of our empty Mario level hypothetical that was in the beginning of the video. The gameplay is just moving from one area to the next in order to see the next cutscene, with the occasional minigame here and there. Well, I say mini-games, but they're more like mini interactive experiences, as most of them consist of simple button prompts that are really just there to distract you until the scene is over or you choose to move on. The one exception to this is the softball part, which includes a simple minigame that at least requires a bit of timing in which you're actually required to hit the ball in order to progress the scene, but I don't think that one 5-minute section of a 3-hour-long experience is enough to call it a game. Instead, I think it would qualify more as an interactive movie, a story that requires the player's input but doesn't do anything else with these interactive elements beyond that. At the end of the day, it may be a subtle distinction, but it's also an important one if you're trying to understand what makes gaming as a narrative medium so special. But what do you guys think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I think this topic is very fascinating and has a lot of room for discussion, so I'd love to hear what other people have to say about it. Oh, and for anyone interested, I'm putting the finishing touches on my next devlog video for my own video game, which should be coming out in the next couple of days. Anyway, that's all for this one though. Thanks for watching.